Pero su esposa, que estaba de pie al lado, se rió y le dimos las buenas noticias del nacimiento de Isaac y después de Isaac, el de Jacob. Entonces estamos hablando del contexto inmediato, es que el Corán está hablando sobre los mensajeros que llegaron a Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, con buenas noticias y también pues para darle la noticia acerca del castigo que descendería sobre el pueblo de Hazrat Lut alayhi salatu wasalam, un pariente suyo. Entonces aquí Allah dice que se rió y le dimos las buenas noticias del nacimiento de Isaac y luego de Jacob. En el comentario aquí, Dahikat dice que se rió o estaba asustada. Entonces tiene estos dos significados o hasta tres. Dahika significa él se rió, él se preguntó, él estaba asustado o tenía miedo. Dahikat emra'atu significa que la mujer estaba menstruando. Pues tiene varios significados. Aquí en el comentario o en la traducción se ha traducido como se rió, pero también es válido decir que se asustó. Aquí dice que cuando Sara, la esposa de Abraham, oyó la triste noticia de la inminente destrucción del pueblo de Lot, naturalmente se asustó y su corazón se llenó de dolor y compasión por ellos. Entonces esto es con la traducción que se asustó. El sentimiento de compasión de Sara por el pueblo de Lot agradó a Dios y se apresuró a darle la buena nueva del nacimiento de un nieto, Jacob, además del anuncio de un hijo, Isaac, que ya se le había hecho a Abraham en el versículo 70. El versículo presente también muestra incidentalmente que no fue Isaac, sino Ismael, a quien Abraham ofreció en sacrificio. Pues según él, Dios prometió no solo un hijo, Isaac, sino también un nieto a Abraham. Así Isaac, el hijo prometido, no solo iba a vivir y casarse, sino también a tener un hijo que se llamaría Jacob. Por lo tanto, no se puede suponer que Dios, que él mismo había anunciado que Isaac iba a vivir, casarse y engendrar hijos, hubiera ordenado que el mismo Isaac fuera ofrecido en sacrificio. Entonces, esto también demuestra que lo que el Corán indica, que el hijo ofrecido por Abraham para el sacrificio no era Isaac, era Ismael. Dos, también acerca de las mujeres, podemos decir que aquí Allah explica, uno, con la traducción que se asustó, pues claro, en este caso tenemos la explicación. Si lo traducimos como que se rió, pues esto también puede ser que a veces hay ciertas personas que, bueno, cuando reciben noticias y especialmente las mujeres emocionalmente a veces demuestran sus emociones en diferentes formas. Entonces, si lo traducimos como que ella se rió, puede ser que en ese estado no sabía cómo reaccionar y por eso se rió. O dos, puede ser que al ver estos mensajeros y cómo se aportaban con Hazrat Ibrahim, ella sabía que estos mensajeros eran enviados por Allah y luego por tener esa compañía en la casa, ella se rió, como demostrando su felicidad, que hay huéspedes tan importantes en mi casa. Pues para una mujer que, bueno, como decimos, ¿no? Una mujer casera, ¿no? Pues para ella recibir invitados que tienen pues tanta dignidad es, digamos, algo que muestra también su propio honor. Entonces, al recibir estos tipos de invitados, pues ella obviamente se rió o demostró su felicidad que personas tan importantes han llegado a mi casa también. Versículo 73. قالت يا ويلتى أألد وأنا عجوز وهذا بعلي شيخا إن هذا لشيء عجيب. Ella dijo, desdichada de mí, ¿cómo voy a tener un hijo si soy una mujer vieja? Y mi marido es un hombre viejo. Cosa extraña es esta, en verdad. Entonces, ajuz mujer vieja, se deriva de ajiza, que significa que carecía de fuerza, poder o habilidad. Entonces, ajuz tiene varios significados: una mujer vieja y anciana, una mujer débil, la esposa de un hombre, ya sea vieja o joven, también el marido de una mujer. El hombre viejo o anciano, un hombre viejo y débil. Entonces aquí dice que el versículo no significa que la expresión de sorpresa por parte de la esposa de Abraham implicara que ella dudara de la veracidad de la noticia que le había comunicado Dios. Tan lejos de ser una mujer creyente común expresar dudas con respecto a los grandes y maravillosos poderes de Dios, mucho más lejos de la esposa de un profeta, que ya había presenciado muchas señales del poder de Dios. De hecho, se preguntaba por la inusual noticia de que le nacería un hijo a una edad tan avanzada. Su sorpresa fue, por tanto, por la magnitud de la bendición que estaba a punto de recibir. Entonces, qalat ya veilata, desdichada de mí. Entonces, esto también es una forma particular a veces de las mujeres hablar. Entonces, no es una expresión de dudar realmente de lo que era la noticia, si ella realmente creía que estas personas fueron enviados por Alá. Solo es que a veces cuando las mujeres reciben una noticia impactante, a veces se expresan de una forma exagerada. Entonces esto es parte de la naturaleza, podemos decir, de muchas mujeres, y no es una exclamación realmente de que dudaba del mensaje. Entonces, ¿cómo voy a tener un hijo si soy una mujer vieja y mi marido es un hombre viejo? Cosa extraña. Inna hadha la shay'un ajib. Entonces, aquí ella pues expresó lo que llegó a la mente inmediatamente. Entonces, esto también sucede cuando hay una situación donde hay estrés. A veces las mujeres dicen las cosas lo que están pensando. Y el hombre a veces pues también está pensando lo mismo, pero no lo expresa. ¿No? Entonces aquí ella lo expresó antes de analizarlo, por así decirlo, que a la vez pues estaba pensando esto, pero también a la vez tenía confianza en Allah. Entonces, lo que el otro, probablemente Abraham estaba pensando, los demás al ver esto, al escuchar esto, pensarían, ella lo expresó. Y también esto demuestra que ella tenía plena confianza también en los invitados, porque no expresaría algo así frente de personas indiferentes o personas ante los que tenía cierto miedo, ¿no? Entonces esto también demuestra que estos invitados en la casa fueron realmente personas piadosas ante los cuales ella sentía pues cómoda. 74. قالوا أتعجبين من أمر الله رحمة الله وبركاته عليكم أهل البيت إنه حميد مجيد. Ellos dijeron, ¿te sorprende el designio de Alá? La misericordia de Alá y sus bendiciones están con vosotros, oh gente de la casa. En verdad, Él merece todas las alabanzas y toda la gloria. Majid, glorioso, se deriva de Mim, Jim, Dal, que significa que era o se volvió glorioso, noble, en un estado de honor o dignidad. Entonces esto es un atributo de Allah. Cuando se usa sobre Arsh, significa exaltado, sublime o noble. Entonces aquí en el comentario dice que los chiitas no incluyen a las esposas del santo profeta en su Ahl Bayt, la gente de su casa. Mientras que en este versículo el término se aplica definitivamente a la esposa de Abraham porque aún no le había nacido ningún hijo. Entonces los chiitas, ellos dicen que la familia del profeta Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam era pura, pero no incluyen las esposas del profeta dentro de esa categoría de personas puras. Ellos dicen que el profeta, su hija, Ali, ¿no? Estas personas fueron purificadas por Dios y no eran hipócritas. Pero ellos tienen pues palabras bien duras contra las esposas del profeta, especialmente Hazrat Aisha, la esposa. Entonces ellos dicen que los Ahl Bayt, la gente de la casa del profeta, solo eran estos y las esposas no. Pero aquí Allah dice que la esposa también es parte de la gente de la casa. En este caso, con el ejemplo de Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, Allah dice que su esposa era parte de los Ahl Bayt, de la gente de la casa de Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. Entonces, es un punto importante porque Allah en otros versículos menciona los Ahl Bayt, la gente de la casa del profeta sallallahu alaihi wasallam, y los alaba también. Entonces los chiitas ahí, ellos dicen que no, esto excluye las esposas del profeta, pero aquí Allah mismo nos ha explicado que este término incluye las esposas también, o las madres. Entonces, de hecho, siempre que este término se utiliza en el Corán con respecto a un profeta, incluye invariablemente a su esposa o esposas. Entonces, ¿te sorprende el designio de Allah? La misericordia de Allah y sus bendiciones están con vosotros, oh gente de la casa. Entonces su forma de explicar el asunto era que uno, Allah puede hacer lo que quiera. Entonces Allah es el Todopoderoso. Entonces aún en este caso, que es improbable que un cónyuge así tenga algún hijo o que les nazca algún hijo, entonces, pero nada es fuera del poder de Dios. Uno, y la segunda explicación, Rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu alaykum ahlal bayt. La misericordia de Allah y sus bendiciones están con vosotros, oh gente de la casa. La segunda explicación era que, mira, Allah ya les ha dado muchas bendiciones en su vida. Ustedes son personas piadosas. Entonces, ¿cómo es? Ya que Allah les ha dado tantas bendiciones antes que eran inesperadas, ahora también puede darle realmente esta otra misericordia y esta otra bendición en sus vidas. Entonces, esto invoca lo que es la historia piadosa de Abraham y su esposa como una explicación de por qué ahora van a recibir esta otra bendición. En verdad, él merece todas las alabanzas y toda la gloria. Innahu Hamidun Majid. Pero, sin embargo, como Allah muchas veces hace en el Sagrado Corán, donde alaba a alguien, también a la vez dice que estas alabanzas realmente pertenecen a Allah. Entonces, si la gente de la casa, en este caso Abraham y su esposa, realizaban buenas obras, debido a lo cual ahora estarían a punto a recibir esta otra bendición, no deben de sentirse orgullosos, sino que deberían de ser aún más o llegar a ser aún más humildes ante Dios, ya que Él merece, en verdad, Él merece todas las alabanzas. Entonces esto no es algo que se puede atribuir únicamente a ellos dos, es la bendición de Allah, y todas las alabanzas en esta situación también pues pertenecen a Él, y toda la gloria también. Entonces, en vez de atribuir alabanzas y gloria a la familia de Abraham, hay que atribuirlo a Allah, que es Allah quien permitió a ellos dos a realizar estas buenas obras. Entonces, siempre vemos este contraste en el Sagrado Corán, donde Allah, a veces en el mismo versículo, aclara ciertos puntos o pues cierra la puerta para la entrada de ciertos pecados debido a un tipo de pensamiento. 75. فلما ذهب عن إبراهيم الروع وجاءته البشرى يجادلنا في قوم لوط. Y cuando el temor abandonó a Abraham y le llegó la buena nueva, empezó a interceder ante nosotros por el pueblo de Lot. El temor de Abraham no era por su propia persona, sino por el pueblo de Lot, una prueba de su gran virtud y nobleza de carácter. La noticia supuso un gran impacto para Abraham. No sabía qué hacer, pero cuando recibió la alentadora noticia del nacimiento de un hijo que sería el padre de una gran nación, sintió cierto alivio y comenzó a suplicar a Dios por el pueblo condenado. Entonces, y cuando el temor abandonó a Abraham y le llegó la buena nueva. Entonces, estas dos cosas, ¿no? Una persona a veces cuando su mente está abrumada por el miedo o otros tipos de sentimientos, no puede orar de forma correcta. Entonces también en el caso de Joseph, pues se menciona en su historia con sus hijos, ¿no? Allá también Allah menciona que él dijo que sí, ciertamente voy a orar por ustedes más adelante. Es decir, que cuando me pase este estado de enojo, de miedo, y ya puedo concentrarme, voy a hacer la oración. Entonces aquí también Abraham, en este caso, pues esperó un poco, ¿no? Pues cuando le pasó el impacto inicial, después de eso comenzó a orar. Y cuando el temor abandonó a Abraham y le llegó la buena nueva, empezó a interceder ante nosotros por el pueblo de Lot. Entonces, ¿por qué los profetas no oran así de forma seria en el primer momento, así cuando están abrumados por diferentes emociones? Pues una explicación de eso es que no quieren pedir algo que sea no tan apropiado. Cuando alguien está abrumado por emociones, puede decir cosas no tan correctas, ¿no? Entonces, por ejemplo, en el caso de Hazrat Nuh, que ya hemos leído, cuando vio a su hijo ahogándose, ahí mismo ofreció una oración. Y Allah así dijo que no es apropiado hacerlo así. Ya te prometí que voy a salvar todos en tu casa, pero este niño tuyo no está incluido en eso. Porque, bueno, la interpretación de las personas en tu casa son las personas en tu casa espiritual. Entonces, una forma de verlo es que si Noé había esperado un poco y contemplado sobre la profecía y había tratado de llegar a la interpretación correcta, no habría realizado esta petición ante Allah. Entonces aquí también una sunna, podemos decir, de los profetas es que cuando reciben noticias así, en el primer momento, cuando todavía están pasando por las emociones, que es algo natural, pues antes de llegar a analizarlo, no van a comenzar a orar y pedir a Allah por cosas así, ¿no? Porque esto sería, a veces, pues puede llegar a ser una oración o una petición no tan apropiada. Está bien, entonces aquí 76 vamos a hacer, inshallah, en la siguiente clase. ¿Alguna duda?
No.
Okay. Ok. En cuanto a los dichos del profeta sallallahu alaihi wasallam, esta mosca. Es, en capítulo 3 de ese libro, ¿no? Una selección de los hadices seleccionados. Capítulo 3 es acerca de la única unicidad. Entonces, Abu Huraira, radhiyallahu ta'ala, nos relata que el santo profeta sallallahu alaihi wasallam mencionó que Allah, el Todopoderoso, declara: mi siervo transgrede en contra mí cuando no le corresponde hacerlo. Me insulta cuando no le corresponde hacerlo. Su transgresión en mi contra consiste en que dice que Allah, el Todopoderoso, habiéndome creado, no me resucitará después de que haya muerto. Y me insulta cuando afirma que Allah ha escogido un hijo para sí cuando soy autosuficiente, aquel de quien todo lo demás depende. Nunca engendré ni fui engendrado, y nunca existió nadie similar a mí. Entonces aquí en este dicho del profeta sallallahu alaihi wasallam, dos cosas que Allah dice, que una es una transgresión y otro es un insulto. La transgresión es pensar que Allah no va a resucitar las personas después de su muerte. Entonces esto es un ataque contra el concepto de su poder. Y el otro, el insulto, es decir, que Allah tenga algún hijo. ¿Y por qué es insultante? Porque decir que Allah tiene un hijo significa que tuvo relaciones sexuales con alguna creación suya, o que no es perfecto, o que en algún momento va a morir, o él mismo no puede cumplir con todas sus tareas y por eso requiere un hijo. Entonces tiene varias consecuencias a esta afirmación. Si Dios tiene un hijo, pues padece de muchas debilidades. Los seres humanos tenemos hijos porque vamos a morir algún día, ¿no? Entonces es atribuir las mismas debilidades a Dios que se clasifica entonces como un insulto contra Allah. Entonces, ¿alguna duda sobre eso? Ok, entonces estoy dejando tiempo para poder también hablar de la carta, ¿no? Punto por punto, la carta. Un segundo. Ah, sí, ok. Y el otro, un texto del Mesías Prometido, alayhi salatu wassalam. En el libro, pues una selección de los escritos del Mesías Prometido. Tenemos el tercer capítulo donde habla sobre el trato de Dios hacia los que son fieles a Él. Entonces, el Mesías Prometido, alayhi salatu wassalam, dice, en verdad, Dios es todopoderoso y omnipotente, y sus devotos fieles que acuden a Él con amor y lealtad no serán desechados. Sus enemigos pretenden aniquilarlos con su maldad, y los malvados juran acabar con ellos. Insensatos, dice Dios, pretenden enfrentarse conmigo y humillar a quienes amo. Efectivamente, nada puede ocurrirle a la tierra si no está decretado por el cielo. Ni la mano terrenal puede extenderse más allá de los límites permitidos por el cielo. Son pues necios, quienes traman crueles y perversos designios al no recordar durante sus detestables y vergonzosas conspiraciones a aquel Ser Supremo, sin cuyo decreto expreso no cae una hoja. Por lo tanto, siempre se ven frustrados en sus esfuerzos sin conseguir perjudicar con su maldad a los justos. Por el contrario, se manifiestan más claramente los signos de Dios, aumentando en sus criaturas el conocimiento divino. De esta forma, el todopoderoso y omnipotente Dios, que permanece oculto a los ojos, se manifiesta a través de señales extraordinarias. Entonces aquí, en este texto, entonces el Mesías Prometido, alayhi salatu wassalam, está hablando como Allah, entonces protege a sus siervos. Y siempre que hay un siervo en la tierra tratando de llevar a cabo el decreto de Allah y cumplir con sus obligaciones hacia él, habrán personas que van a tratar de imponer barreras y dificultades en su camino. Pero ahí Allah dice que va a mostrar su apoyo por los justos, ¿no? Entonces, inshallah, vamos a continuar próxima clase. Ok. ¿Alguna duda o pregunta?
The stuff that you're reading from, it's ¿tú me lo puedes mandar a yo tenerlo electrónico?
You have it, no? This physical book right here?
No.
The small blue one?
No.
No? You sure?
Oh, I never know.
This one right here.
No. That's
No,
the
I'm
one you're
sure,
using?
yeah, I'm sure you have it. It was part of the first 3 months worth of work. You didn't get this? Okay, go ahead. You can take one. I thought you had it in English, maybe.
No, no. This is the one you're reading from me, right?
Yeah, same one.
And we're up to where? What did we?
We're on the third one,
Third page?
the third chapter.
Third chapter, right?
So it's divided by chapters, topics. Right? So third topic, el tratado de Dios hacia los que son fieles a él.
That's what we're up to? Or
Yeah, we just did the first one.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess we can start with your letter. You want me to leave the stream on or take it off?
No, everybody what happened.
Okay.
Good trade.
All right, let me pull up the letter and we can go through it maybe. Let's see.
You have to say it in Spanish.
Yeah, it's written in Spanish, but I guess we can discuss it in English even.
No.
Oh wait, no, it's in English. Okay,
But
sorry.
you
Yeah,
have
well,
to say it in Spanish.
it's okay. We'll discuss in English. Okay. So this is a letter, I guess, that was received. So the first point is, by the way, where are the original Usman Qurans that were composed 20 years after Muhammad died and were spread to the various cities in the Islamic world? If they were so holy and protected by Allah, they would not have rotted away or become lost through time and centuries. So number one, the original Usman Qurans that were composed, this gives an idea that there weren't any Qurans that existed before this. The Quran always existed since the time of the Prophet ﷺ, in the memory of the Prophet, in the memory of the companions that memorized the entire text and would recite it 5 times a day in their prayers, and also during the month of Ramadan, and also in other places. The Quran always existed. It was also written down on different objects and things like that, scrolls, while it was being revealed. Then it was compiled during the time of Hazrat Abu Bakr. So during the time or the life of the first successor, we're talking about within, maybe 3 to 5 years after the death of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, the entire Quran was compiled into a single volume. So it already existed. So they gathered everything upon which it was written, and they confirmed that they physically had the verse with them alongside the confirmation of the Hufaz, the people that had been taught directly by the Prophet ﷺ, the Holy Quran, and then they included it in a single volume, right? So the Quran existed. The first volume was made by Hazrat Abu Bakr, then Hazrat Usman, right? Or it was compiled by Hazrat Abu Bakr, then Hazrat Usman made the first text of it to send out to different areas, right? And then from there, many copies were made, and it continued that way. But this betrays a lack of understanding of that no text can survive for over 1,000 years, especially at that time, right? So these things were written on parchment and other sort of things like that, and with the passage of time, these things degrade, right? And it's not to say that there wasn't any value to the text of Usman. Even now, in different libraries around the world, there are many ancient manuscripts of the Holy Quran. There's one in Birmingham, which they say is perhaps maybe the exact same one, if not very close to it, right? So these things were also preserved to a certain degree, and that manuscript shows that the Quran is exactly the same as it was during the life of the Holy Prophet. No changes have come into it. So it's not that the Muslims didn't have any value for these things. They did, and they had an enormous sense of value of the Holy Quran, and that's why they held on to it. That's why the Quran is the only book that has been memorized and written since the day of its revelation up until now, right? No other religious community has shown such deference for their revealed text as the Muslims did, right? If they did, then we wouldn't have so many versions of these different books and Bibles and things like that, right? So then he goes on to insult the Holy Prophet ﷺ. All Muslims writings say that Muhammad was a robber, a killer, a warlord, slave owner, etc. At that time, that was something to admire back then, not now, and not even then. So, that's a contradiction. Either it was something you admire or it's not, for good moral people of any religion. Okay, so Muhammad ﷺ was then what Trump is now, a charismatic, nauzubillah, con artist that did not perform any miracles. Okay, so this is another point. So we'll address the first point. So Muhammad, they say, or he says, robbed caravans. So number one, and was a killer and warlord. I guess this is the first aspect of it. So we know that unfortunately during the initial period of Islam, many battles were waged against the Muslims. So they had to wage defensive battles. And part of defensive battles and the strategy of war is to disrupt the supply lines of the enemy. Right? This is common tactic in any sort of confrontation. So this is what the Holy Prophet ﷺ did. Those same caravans that were being used to supply the enemy forces, those caravans and supply lines were being cut off by the Muslims. And this is not something that we would say with shame. We would actually present it with a certain level of pride that the Prophet ﷺ was an excellent general. Yes, very strategious, and this was the best way to minimize casualties, in fact, instead of, on both sides, right? So this was an excellent strategy that was employed to cut off the caravans wherever possible, right? And to not let the spoils that they would get from their, commercial activities to go back to those people to spend against the Muslims, right? And force them to the negotiating table, right? In this way as well. So number one, that's not something that's wrong. It was actually something that's praiseworthy. A killer, the Prophet ﷺ, he's not mentioned actually to have killed anyone during his life, even during the battles. There is one narration which is sometimes invoked that he was participating in a battle and he used his spear and that hit somebody, and then that person later died of that wound or maybe some other wounds. So whether he personally killed anyone or not is a matter of debate, but he did participate in battles. He was the general, of course. He permitted the Muslims to go in defensive battles against the enemy. And yes, there were some people that were killed as a result of this. But if he did not do that, then all the Muslims would have been wiped out, right? So there would be they would all have died at the hands of their enemies. So defending one's life against an aggressive party is not a sin. In fact, it's something praiseworthy, right? And if a prophet could not go to war, then of course they have to reject all the other prophets that were involved in different wars and battles, starting from Moses, right? Great prophet Moses, they attribute many battles and things to him, and Joshua and all the other prophets that came after him as well. But they still accept them as being divinely led or divinely inspired individuals. So just the fact that a prophet is involved in different battles or acts as the general does not disqualify him from prophethood, right?
I think in the earlier conversation that we had, you had also said that when they were being persecuted, he was not allowed to kill them until he got the okay from Allah, and that was years later.
So this was after 13 years almost of patience. And then they migrated from that town, and when there was no other option left, when they migrated and they were still coming after them, that's where it was permitted for them to now defend themselves, right? So yes, that's another important aspect, that the Muslims didn't seek war. They avoided it to the maximum extent possible. So then it says that the Prophet ﷺ married Hazrat Aisha when she was underage. We talked a little about this, but in brief, that is not a hadith. Aisha was probably anywhere from 12 to 18, 19 when she married the Prophet ﷺ. The narration that she was actually 9 is not a hadith, number one, and number two, there's a lot of questions surrounding its origin and its authenticity. And according to many studies, that hadith actually came out somewhere from Iraq, maybe a century after the Prophet ﷺ, and it didn't exist before that. So it's most likely something that was a forgery that came into some of the collections of ahadith, even the most authentic collections of ahadith. But we know at the time when the Prophet ﷺ married her, it was Hazrat Abu Bakr, the father, that actually pushed the Prophet ﷺ to finish the marriage ceremony, right, and take her on as a wife. It was because she was probably getting a little bit older at that point, according to the culture in which she lived. No enemy at the time ever raised this as a point of contention. Nobody ever thought it was strange. So according to the culture in which they lived, she was of age, whatever that age was. Subsequently, after the marriage, there was no sign ever that she was ever abused in any sort of way. She was deemed the mother of the believers. She was given extremely respectful position in Muslim society until the day of her death. She loved the Holy Prophet ﷺ. She was extremely intelligent. She narrated over 2,000 ahadith from him, right? She was a scholar of Islam in her own right. Senior companions would go to her to ask her opinion about different matters of Islam. And so no matter what way you look at it, there was no concept ever that she was ever abused in any sort of situation, right? In fact, the fact that she was the wife of the Holy Prophet ﷺ was the defining aspect of her life, and she appreciated it. So this idea that she married at a young age, at the time in which she lived, it was considered completely normal. And even in many other societies around the world, up until about 150 years ago, the age of puberty was when people started to marry and have families. Right? That was the norm. So the next thing, do not perform any miracles, in which many people believe because they choose to believe, because that's easier to do than thinking for yourself. So the Prophet ﷺ showed thousands of miracles during his life. The greatest miracle was the Quran, right? All the prophecies of the Quran about how this is a complete book and how it will remain valid for the rest of time, how it's a universal teaching within the Quran. Then also many prophecies that were fulfilled about the victory of Islam, about the protection of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, even prophecies about the latter days that have been fulfilled. And then outside of that as well, miracles of healing, many cases of how the Prophet ﷺ would heal people, how he would miraculously increase food and water, right? How his enemies would convert upon seeing him, the impact that he had on people. So there were many hundreds, if not thousands of miracles that he showed during his life, and that the Quran, the revelation that he received and transmitted to us, continues to show. So someone saying that he didn't show any miracles, I don't understand it. Maybe he could explain it on his own. So if despite all this you feel that you still need to follow this man and his God, know that you are doing it with full knowledge and that you're following an evil man by any standard, past or present, and his lying God. So if you look at the Holy Prophet ﷺ, from all standards by which we would judge a man, his morals, his ethics, his understanding of situations, in his position as a father, as a husband, as a political leader, as a head of state, as a general, as a warrior, he was the most perfect individual, right? And this is what the Quran states. So to say that he was an evil man by any standard, past or present, I would challenge him to bring someone that was superior to the Prophet ﷺ in all of those facets. Study the Quran more, find out more on YouTube. They can explain it better than I. So then he mentioned some individuals, Christian apologists and apostates from Islam that raise many allegations against Islam. Well, there are many that raise allegations against all religions. That's not an argument that all religions are false. Everyone has their own ideas. The fact that they express them doesn't automatically mean that they're right. You are made to question, not follow blindly. So yes, Islam says we should not follow things blindly. That's why it presents so many arguments and evidences in favor of what it's saying. If this book is eternal and changeable and in heaven, how come Allah didn't bother to tell humans about it before? So this is a misconception. Some Muslims believe that the Holy Quran has always been in existence. Fi lawhim mahfuz, it says, in a secure tablet, and that from this tablet it was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. So we don't believe that. We have a different interpretation of those verses. The Quran was revealed to the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and it was not revealed previous to him, because for many reasons the people couldn't understand the Holy Quran or implement it before the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So Allah, in his wisdom, even though he knew that he would reveal the Quran, didn't reveal it until the Holy Prophet ﷺ came. And the same allegation could be made against any other religious authority, that people say that Jesus came, and when he did, why didn't he come before, right? Why didn't he send him right after Adam so people wouldn't fall into sin, right? All of that. So, you could just push it back, even further. Why did he even make Adam? Why was there a fall? Why didn't he just do this or that? So, Allah has his wisdom of when he sends things and who he sends them to. And, if you're not willing to accept that, then at a certain point, you're just going to want to throw out the entire system from top to bottom and say this doesn't make any sense. So it says Middle East written history starts about 3200 BC, and yet there is no hint of this book in any writing prior to 653 AD. Yes, we accept the Quran was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. It wasn't revealed previous to that. So we shouldn't expect to find the Quran, in other places or things like that. Not in the Torah, not in the Gospels, not in the Egyptian books of the dead, nowhere. Allah could not bother to tell us of its existence back then. Diacritical mark. Okay, so yeah, so it didn't exist back then. Yes, there are prophecies, many prophecies about the coming of the Quran and Islam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and these prophecies exist across all religions because this was supposed to be the Islam is a universal religion, and all prophets, in their writings that have reached us, we find such prophecies about Islam. The next thing he says is diacritical markings are also lacking in the earliest surviving manuscripts of this unchangeable book. They were added in later, in a century or two. So yes, there's a grain of truth to this. The earliest surviving manuscripts, the manuscript of Usman and the ones that were made after that, they do not have diacritical marks, and that's because the diacritical marks tell us what vowel sound to make after the consonant, whether it's a, e, or u. But the Arabs didn't need this, right? They were able to read the text without the diacritical marks and understand what the word was, right? And there are still, even now, right? There are many in the modern world, Arabs don't use diacritical marks. Right?
I learned that when I was in my class. They would see how the words being used in a sentence, so they would know exactly.
Yeah, they would know how to pronounce it, right? And so this is a misconception on his part due to his lack of knowledge of the Arabic language. That even now, even today, not to mention Arabs in the past that weren't used to even reading, right? They knew how to pronounce these words without the help of the diacritical marks. The diacritical marks were put in later to help non-Arab speakers or readers of the Quran to help them read the Quran correctly, right? Islam tells Allah grabbed Jesus from the cross and took him to heaven and put someone else in his place on the cross. Follow through then. This means that Allah lied to humanity and let Christianity spread all over the Mediterranean world for 650 years on a lie. Why would you follow a lying God? So, partly we're in agreement with him. We do not believe that Allah took Jesus from the cross and took him to heaven and put someone else on the cross in his place. We believe that Allah saved Jesus from death on the cross. He was put on the cross, as the Quran says. He was made to appear as if he had died. He was taken down very much alive. He was nursed back to health. And then he continued on his journey to the east, bringing his message to the lost tribes of the house of Israel, eventually reaching Kashmir and dying there, where today we find the tomb of Yus Asif, translated as the tomb of Jesus, in that same neighborhood of Khanyar in Kashmir. So Allah lied humanity and let Christianity spread all over the Mediterranean world for 650 years on a lie. So this is a deeper question as to why Allah would allow any sort of false religion to spread or false ideas to spread. So number one, Allah has given us libre albedrío. We have free will, and that includes the spread of correct ideas and the spread of incorrect ideas. Christianity, Orthodox Christianity as it's understood today, we do not accept it. We believe that it's an invention more or less of Paul, and the concepts there are very much false. Despite this, Orthodox Christianity spread across the Mediterranean, and even today there's over 1 billion Christians, just like there are over 1 billion Hindus, right? So that doesn't mean that all of them must be correct. The way that we understand it is that these religions were initially started by true prophets, right? And that's why they were allowed to spread. And number two, Allah tells us that he has opened up the paths of goodness and evil and misguidance before us. So we can take any path that we choose, right? So this is part of our free will. Allah does not impose his will upon us. If he did, then there would only be one path for us to take, right? And that would defeat the purpose of our creation, which is to choose the right path on our own, after which we become deserving of blessings. All hadiths are of Muslim origin, no Christian or Jewish editions. If some are more reliable than others, why keep them all together? They are just picking and choosing what is convenient for them to tell you what they want you to know about Muhammad. So all hadiths are of Muslim origin. Of course, the first followers of the Prophet Muhammad were all Muslims, right? Why would a non-Muslim narrate anything from him, right? So number one, yes, the vast majority or all the ahadith are of Muslim origin because those were the people that gave importance to what the Prophet was saying, right? Afterwards, of course, we find other non-Muslim sources that talk about the spread of Islam and through Muslim sources who the Prophet Muhammad was and things like that, right? But we can understand pretty much everyone in the Arab Peninsula became a Muslim, right? So then these Muslims, of course, when they started writing their histories and the history of the Prophet narrated a hadith from him. Some are more reliable than others, then why keep them all together? So there are different compilations of the hadith. So every hadith has a chain of narrators, and then we have the text of the hadith, what the Prophet stated. Then what happens is that there is a criticism that is done of the chain of narrators, of the narrators themselves, and of the text of the ahadith. We compare them to other ahadith, we compare them to the Quran, and then a decision is made, right? Whether that hadith is a reliable hadith or not. So there have been certain muhaddiseen, scholars of the ahadith, that have put together different compilations based on their understanding of the reliability of these ahadith. It's not that every compilation just has a whole bunch of hadiths thrown together and we don't know whether they're reliable or not. Some compilations are considered as being more reliable or filled with more reliable ahadiths than others. So amongst them, we find the compilation of Imam Bukhari as being considered one of the most reliable or the most reliable. Then Sahih Muslim, and then there's the Sahih Sitta, the 6 authentic compilations among Sunni Muslims. That's not to say that there are no other authentic ahadith outside of these 6 compilations. Even within these 6 compilations, you'll find that the authors or the compilers, they themselves had a system of critique. So in certain compilations, they'll say that this hadith is Hasan, that it's under the grade of Sahih for XYZ reason, right? And then others would say that this is da'if, that this is a weak hadith for such and such reason, right? So the critique of hadith is something that was invented by the scholars to help us understand the hadith better. No other religious group has gone to this extent to try and filter the oral narrations that existed about their prophet, right? No one else did it, right? So this shows the importance that the Muslim scholars gave to the words of the prophet, right? And the scholarly attitude that they had about it. They didn't accept everything at face value. They studied it, they critiqued it, and they tried to get to the bottom of the issue. Nevertheless, we do accept that, and the Prophet Messiah explained that the entire field of hadith studies is zanni. It's not based on absolute knowledge. Absolute knowledge is only in the Quran, right? So the fact that these ahadiths were narrated by people and then other people then judge them based on what they understood about the narrators themselves or things like that. There could be differences of opinion amongst different people that critique those ahadiths. Some may take those same ahadiths as being more reliable. Others may state that no, for us it's not such a reliable hadith for XYZ reason. So even amongst the different muhaddiseen, there are different opinions on the reliability of the different ahadiths. That is why we don't rely solely on these critiques. The promised Messiah gave us a very easy way to judge a correct hadith from a false hadith. He said that, look at the Quran. The Quran is the word of Allah. Any hadith that is according to the Quran, we're willing to accept it. Right? Even if it's considered a weak hadith, if it's according to the Quran and it's weak according to the muhaddiseen, we will still accept it as being true. And this is the most correct posture. Because look, even if someone says that, look, this person narrated to this person and this person had a weak memory. So that's why this hadith is a weak hadith. You don't have absolute knowledge. Despite having a weak memory, he might have narrated this truly and faithfully without any errors, right? So because there's this unknown factor, right? And there's a lot of speculation, you could say, even in the field of hadith critique, right? The best posture is to accept any hadith that does not go against the Quran, like the promised Messiah stated. And yes, if there's one hadith that is stronger than another hadith and it gives a different sort of idea as to what the Prophet was saying, then we can accept the stronger hadith as long as it doesn't go against the Quran, right? And the Sunnah. So this is the most reliable way to judge the ahadith, which we've done. When we do it that way, everything comes together very nicely. They're just picking and choosing what was convenient for them to tell you, what they want you to know about Muhammad. Is that if that was true, then why would there be, according to this individual, so much controversy in the ahadith, right? So he himself is saying that, Muhammad did this, and there were battles, and there was underage marriage, and if this was the case, why would they compile these sort of things, right? If they were just trying to make a perfect religion, or from his perspective, we believe Islam is a perfect religion, but from his perspective, if they were trying to avoid compiling any controversial issue, then we wouldn't have these controversial aspects in the Islamic literature. So this shows their sincerity. Whatever they came upon, they tried to critique it. Some scholars, even if they personally didn't critique it, they just compiled whatever existed at the time. And they did it in the hope that people that would come afterwards would be able to critique the stories and narrations that were around at their time, right? So this was their sincerity. They didn't want anything to go missing. So it's actually a point in favor of Islam rather against Islam that this happened in the way that it did. So I think that's everything. No? Sources for Islam were worse than Jesus. Okay, are these I think these are your own notes, no? In the red? No, that's him? You wrote in 2 different colors?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. A bit strange, no? Sources for Muhammad were worse than for Jesus. Seerah, tafseers, and biography were written very briefly. Their videos are much more detailed. So the biggest source for the life of the Prophet ﷺ is the Quran itself, right? So these people talk about the compilation of the ahadith and the tafasir and things like that, and the sirat. The Holy Quran talks about the life of the Prophet ﷺ, right? In a lot of detail, in fact, in certain places. And that existed from the very first revelation, right? Up until the death of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. And then there are also collections of ahadith and narrations that existed very early during the life of the Prophet ﷺ. The companions memorized these narrations. Those were compiled later in proto-collections, you could say, of the ahadith. And those exist. Mention of them is made in the Islamic history and literature. So the ahadith have also been around for many, many years. And the first major compilations, yes, started to be made at around 100 years after. But that's not to say that after 100 years, these narrations just came into existence. They were already there. They were being shared. People were also recording them. But the major compilations started to be made of these same narrations about 100 years after, with the level of critique and all these other things baked into it. But to say that the ahadith came into existence 100 years after, that's not true, right? No, right? They already existed, All right. So